What's up? I'm Andrew from the band Ripped to Shreds, and today we are going to be talking about split records. This is going to be mostly about metal because I don't know anything about reggae or dub. So what the heck is a split? A split record is a release that features two different artists on a 7-inch vinyl like this. Sometimes you have split albums that are on full 12 inches. It's distinct from a collaboration, which are several artists working on the same songs. A split has separate bands, each with their own songs on each side of the vinyl. The difference between a split and a compilation is a little bit murkier. A comp usually has a whole bunch of bands contributing one or two songs, and common sources of compilation CDs are like label or magazine samplers. Sometimes you have a benefit compilation organized for a particular cause, and sometimes a regional scene like Bay Area hardcore will organize a comp. I personally think that the absolute maximum a split can have before it turns into compilation is 4 albums, but there's not really a universal consensus. Now, record labels have always put multiple artists onto a single release. Various reasons for doing so include label promotional samplers, greatest hits, to tributes to a particular artist. One of the earliest examples of a metal record featuring more than one artist that I could find was a 1970 radio promo 7-inch for Black Sabbath and Rock Aid Armenia. Another radio promo example is a 7-inch split of Sabbath's Paranoid with Van Halen's Running with the Devil. But that's probably not what most of us think of when we think of a split.
A split record is, I think, a way for two bands to come together, collaborate, and each one to get to know each other.
But split means friendship.
Back in the day, if you were into Sinister, you would buy that 7-inch with Monastery, but you never heard Monastery, right? So then you discover Monastery. It's like, oh, fuck, this is cool. And then you start hunting and digging, and you would discover these bands, and it was just awesome.
Usually band choose the band they want to release split EP with, so you can learn the band's taste. And unlike full album, there is no filler song, so you can enjoy whole split EP.
Before the internet, we in the underground scene, we releasing lots of the split stuff. So I was young, and I bought split 7 inches. I don't know what other side bands. They check in, this is band fucking awesome, right? Guardian Necropsy and Gut. I know the one band, but the B-side band is a new band. So that is really important, supporting each other, finding a new band.
Split 7 inches mean the world to me. I wouldn't have a label if it wasn't for split 7 inches. Gothic Lee's God Stomper split, Haunted Hotel 01, released in February of 2002. Without my label, I would not have all the contacts and friends throughout the world without it. Here I am 23 years later, still releasing split 7 inches. They're really fun to collect, I think. If I'm at a store or I see a distro set up at a show, the first place I go right to the 7-inch. I probably have close to 2,000 of them.
Carl Sagan once said, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. So when we discuss what a split record means, we need to just briefly examine the early history of recorded music and how music was disseminated. Music performed without manual human intervention has a rich history reaching at least as far back as the 9th century, with a water-powered organ created by a trio of brothers in Baghdad. There were various clockwork versions of music boxes that would proliferate from the 13th century onwards, eventually culminating in the late 1800s with what we call a player piano, which is mechanically driven piano that selects notes based on a roll of paper with holes punched in it. Player pianos would peak in popularity in the early 1920s before the market would completely bottom out. The first commercial medium for recorded music were phonograph cylinders, invented by Thomas Edison in 1877. They were cylinders made of wax with grooves etched into them. They could only be played a handful of times before the grooves wore out. Emil Berliner developed a disc made of shellac called gramophone records several years after Edison in 1887. By the 1910s, cylinders were overtaken by the gramophone disc as the dominant form of commercially sold recordings. It's important to remember that at this point, recordings were still made by acoustically vibrating a small needle, etching the grooves onto the actual disc itself, with the performers amplified by a horn that was attached to the stylus. Certain instruments, like violin, couldn't really be properly recorded on such a setup. Microphones and electrical amplification were yet to be invented, so the sound quality of these early recordings paled in comparison to a music box or player piano. From 1916 till 1924, the telephone company Western Electric privately developed the first condenser microphone and a fully electrical recording system before inviting the two largest record companies at the time, Victor and Columbia, for a demonstration. In late 1925, those labels began to release the first commercially available electrical recordings, and acoustic recording would be completely obsolete by the 30s. At the same time, radio became mainstream in the early 20s, and most American households would own a radio by 1931. Music on early radio programs were performed live rather than pre-recorded, and recording artists would stipulate that the records were not legal for radio broadcasting. A federal court ruling in 1940 would strike that down, and by the mid-40s, performing rights organizations like ASCAP would complain that the prevalence of recorded music being broadcast on radio lessened the demand for their artists to perform live on air. After World War II, companies would switch materials from shellac to vinyl, and in 1948, the 45 RPM, that's rotations per minute, 7-inch vinyl was invented by RCA Victor as a successor to their previous 78 RPM shellac discs and as a competitor to Columbia's 33 RPM 12-inch LP. They had a large hole, unlike this small hole version that I've got here, which is a modern 7-inch. Those old 7 inches would have a hole about this big, and they could fit up to 5 minutes of music aside. Into the 1950s, the 7-inch single was the dominant format for artists to create. They were played in jukeboxes, spun on radio. Imagine trying to find the hit single on hole 33. And they were relatively cheap to produce and purchase. Careers like Elvis Presley were defined by their hit singles. What modern audiences would consider an album, a cohesive collection of thematically related recordings lasting from 30 to 40 minutes, wouldn't exist until the late 50s and only became commercially popular in the 60s with the Beatles' Rubber Soul. Album-oriented FM radio format would gain popularity through the late 60s to 70s, where DJs were free to play deep cuts off an album. But to this day, hit singles are still the dominant format of music broadcast on radio. Now, what I've described so far is entirely the music industry made of professional musicians. It's actually pretty hard to read about amateur music and the history of it. Parlor music was distributed as sheet music in the 19th century for enthusiasts to perform at home. Beyond that, folk musical traditions or church and religious music would have made up a large portion of the average person's musical consumption and performance. Despite phonographs being advertised for preserving speech and music at home since the late 1800s, home recordings of hobbyists don't seem to have circulated in any significant number until the 1980s and instead stayed in private family archives. This is significant because now we come to punk, and punk is self-described as music made by and for amateurs. Punk rock came to prominence in the 1970s, and with it, a culture of DIY, do-it-yourself. It's a little debatable how truly DIY the initial wave of punk rock was, considering bands still recorded in professional studios. They still signed with for-profit labels, and they still released recordings distributed through major label networks with sales numbers that were reported to the charts. Punk still received radio airplay, one of the biggest sales drivers and avenues of promotion. So I think the true ethos associated with DIY would come around with the self-released single and independent record labels. Rough Trade Records, which began as a shop in London in '76, formed a distribution chain in concert with other independent labels called the Cartel as a way to circumvent major label distribution. And with these band-run independent labels that were self-releasing music, we would get maybe the earliest example of a punk split from Discord Records' Faith Void 12-inch split in '82. However, not many well-known bands from that early '80s era of hardcore actually made two-band splits. Instead, it was way more common for them to organize compilations with as many as 10 bands, like Tooth and Nail, or Yes LA, Flex Your Head, Blasting Concept, Let Them Eat Jelly Beans, etc., etc. And then just a couple years later, we would get GRINDCORE, with Extreme Noise Terror and Chaos UK putting out the Ear Slaughter split LP in '86. We'd have Terrorizer and Nausea putting out their split demo in '88. Ass Suck and Old Lady Drivers, SOB and Napalm Death. So these splits were really the precursor to the explosion that we would get in the early '90s, with bands like Agathocles, Unholy Grave, or Paterani doing 7 inches with anyone and everyone. Power Violence and Screamo would give us splits with Spaz, Charles Bronson, Orchid, or Combat Wounded Veteran. But why were splits appealing?
It's cooperation, helping each other to release some songs. Some bands doesn't have money or whatever, so maybe another band can help.
A few of the pioneers, like Carcass or Napalm Death, could get radio airplay on BBC via DJs like John Peel. But distribution for the vast majority of independent grindcore bands would be limited to international tape trading through mail or fanzines and selling records out of the trunk of your car. Indie labels run by bands struggled to get distribution deals, and mail order was the driver of sales. There wasn't any radio airplay for relatively mainstream bands like Deicide on major stations, much less grindcore or power violence. Any airtime would have been limited to campus radio. Now, if I pull up some college music journal charts from the mid-90s, under loud rock, I can see some death metal. So I'm sure grind and power violence got a non-zero amount of airplay by student enthusiasts, but I'm a little skeptical how significant it was. Probably the most mainstream promotion that grindcore bands would get would be like a Maximum Rock and Roll review. Then there's a lot of practicality to making a split. If you're ponying up $1,000 to press a 7-inch, right, the more people who can chip in a few bucks, the better. Cassettes sound like garbage, while in the early 90s, CDs were still too expensive to make for an indie band. The other band can distribute their half of records made and introduce your band to their fans as well. You don't need to spend as much money on precious studio time because you don't need to record as many songs. But most importantly, splits were punk, splits were DIY, and splits were friendship.
Split record is my life because grindcore is very, very underground. But if we make a split album, we can make world wider.
Now, while 70s punk and 80s hardcore claimed to be DIY and counterculture, they still had enough mainstream acceptance that it was a commercially viable form of music. Bands like Black Flag or Bad Brains could coast on their cult cred well into their retirement years. Not crossing over onto real major labels was usually a deliberate choice for bands like Fugazi. But for power violence and grindcore, the music was simply too abrasive to ever gain real mass acceptance. With the advent of the internet, the traditional avenue of music distribution and promotion has gone a total paradigm shift. It's no longer necessary to manufacture physical discs that need to be individually sold and shipped, and you can distribute an unlimited amount of songs for everyone in the world to hear instantly. But there's still hundreds of grind splits released digitally every year. Today, splits are a cultural performance. They're a way of expressing your participation in grindcore and the DIY ethos.
Promotional. I mean, yeah, exactly. Promotional. No, I only had one split album out by myself with my band, and that was just to kick off a Japan tour for the first time. For that reason, that works.
A lot of the original motivations don't really hold true anymore.
The cost to make a 7-inch has really gone through the roof. When I started collecting 7-inches, they were $3 PPD. It covered your record and your postage. And nobody wants to pay $10 for a 7-inch when we were still used to paying like $5 or $6 for them.
Fewer and fewer bands are going to professional recording studios. You could record a pretty professional sounding production at home for just a few $100 of gear. And if you want to actually get people to listen to your music, there's no need to spend thousands of dollars on pressing vinyl when you can just upload it on YouTube or Bandcamp for everyone to listen to. So here are some of my friends' favorite splits and my favorite splits.
Malignant Tumor Splash Ball split I released myself. It's like a bunch of friends and we always wanted to do it back in times, and I did maybe 3 or 4 reprints of this Gore Grind, the masterpiece.
My favorite split EP is Guillaume and Retaliation. It's amazing Gore Grind split EP. If you have never heard of it, you should check it out. It's really good.
Acceleration with putrid opal from France, and the second one is the lymphatic phlegm that I worship with the Last Days of Humanity. And this record needs to get reissued because it's impossible to find them. You need to pay like $200.
King of splits, Agathocles. They're split with excruciating terror. Rest in peace, Victor Garcia. Probably my favorite Agathocles split is the split with VNA. Old Lady Drivers, Ass Suck, total classic. And then I got Napalm Death, SOB. This is a classic and it's so badass I had to get the red one too, Napalm Death, SOB. So I got that.
I want to say my split album with a Swarm, a legendary grindcore band from Kobe. That it was my dream split album. It was really good. So please listen that split album. Thanks so much.
One of my favorites is this one for sure. With Million Tumor, Gride and Cerebral Turbulency. And actually, Michal, the drummer, played in Million Tumor as well. But he's my favorite drummer in the grind scene ever. Cerebral Turbulency evolved in a more modern grindcore. They were very open-minded. I guess they included some more neo metal stuff. The cowbell I used is because of him too. He was a great friend of mine. One of my first Czech friends, and he was very supporting Pulmo as well.
I'm dated Bain 2004. The artist member was Ratri, Vomit Remnants, and Warman for touring. With a band from Nagano and Invictus / a band from Korea.
Me and Andrew released this split 7-inch, Bro. Mega fan of Agathocles. As big as a fan as I am, I still say the band name wrong. I'm American. This is their first split. The split with Reek Buoys. And this gave birth to countless X splits. And yes, I do have them all. Every single one of them. What's the best split 7-inch of all time? The first one that came to my mind was the Ag split with Man is the Bastard. This is from 1993. Both bands at their peak. Even in the little Ag write-up, it says like, hey, we tried something different. They kind of took a chance, but it really paid off. Jan singing in more of his hardcore voice. You flip it over to the Man is the Bastard side. And the second track, I don't think any band sounds more genuinely pissed off than Man is the Bastard. There's a chant at the end where they just keep going and going, and they just sound like they're going to explode. I pulled this one out just as an honorable mention. This is the Spaz 25 to Life split 7-inch. Again, I got this for $3 PPD, man, when this came out. I grew up going to New York hardcore shows. I saw 25 to Life a million times, and I was a huge fan of Spaz. I still am. Completely out of left field, totally absurd, but it's a great record. And they made it happen, man. Hey, all you fucking labels out there, stop putting out the fucking 7-minute 12-inch. That shit sucks. Man up, grow some balls, take a loss. It's not all about the money. Put out some 7-inches.
My first split stuff is Pungent Strange and Disharmonic Orchestra. That is so good. Yeah, my old band, she is also releasing a lot of the split stuff. This is underground style. So I want to release a lot of the good bands.
So the most important split to me personally has to be the Rip to Shreds split with Brain Corrosion. I met Derek 2018 in Taiwan when Brain Corrosion played with Butcher ABC. I owe Derek a lot. I would not be playing live without him. Also, I got to know Takafumi through covering Dodonpachi from Gridlink. And this is the first thing that I released where I mixed it myself and I was happy with the results. So this one means a lot to me. Fiend and Recalcitrant. Some of my fucking favorite Fiend material. I miss this band so much. This one is actually a death metal split. Suicide and Cemetery Filth. Unspeakable Acts Records put this out. I mostly listen to this for the Suicide side, but the Cemetery Filth side's pretty good too. Suicide's a band from Australia, and their track on this is a re-recording of one of the songs on their EP, and it's just like so much more raw and fast and disgusting, and it totally destroys the EP version. Fucking sulfuric cautery and cyst gurgle. Ridiculous fucking ping everywhere. And I think this is maybe my favorite split. Carcass Grinder with Insect Warfare. The Insect Warfare side of this goes so hard. Carcass Grinder's no slouch either. I fucking love Pestilent Excruciation. It's probably one of my favorite, probably is my favorite Insect Warfare song ever. That's all for today, folks. I actually have a new split with Reptile out right now. Well, it's out digitally right now. I'll have the CDRs in a couple weeks. Next week, I will have Mike Scalzi from Slaufeg talking about some of his musical inspirations for Slaufeg. In just a few weeks, we'll be down in Los Angeles playing 1720 with Mutilatriad and a whole bunch of other bands. So, see you guys there. Peace.